In honor of Hurricane Sandy's 10-year anniversary, the Rutgers Weather Watchers wanted to commemorate the great event. Hurricane Sandy struck New Jersey on October 29, 2012. Hurricane Sandy is also known as Superstorm Sandy because it was not just a hurricane, but also a cluster of several storms that collided together. The storm was quite unexpected because its original path was not intended to hit New Jersey at all until it made a turn for the worst. Right when the storm happened, President Barack Obama contacted Governor Chris Christie about the storm, asking if anything could be done to help once it struck. There was also a major disaster declaration declared for New Jersey. That declaration provides recovery efforts, including temporary housing and low-cost loans to cover uninsured property loss, and assistance to individuals and businesses. Throughout the video, to get a better grasp of Sandy's effects, we will learn more about some experiences and disaster preparedness advice from some people who experienced the storm firsthand.
So I am Dr. Steve Decker. I am the undergraduate program director for meteorology here at Rutgers and also an associate teaching professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences. I've been here at Rutgers since 2006.
I've been at Rutgers in the Department of Environmental Sciences since 2012. 2009, 2012. Yeah, so I teach primarily in the undergraduate meteorology program. My research focuses on tropical climate dynamics. I don't really do hurricanes, but studying the climate of the tropics, in particular rainfall.
My name's Luann. I'm a junior at Rutgers University, and I'm currently majoring in meteorology. And I currently live in Bridgewater, New Jersey, and I have all my life, especially during Hurricane Sandy, as we'll talk about.
So my name is Colleen McHugh. I got my meteorology degree from Rutgers in 2015. I then went on to get a master's degree also in atmospheric science and meteorology in 2017 from the University at Albany. And I moved back to New Jersey after that, taught at Rutgers for a few years, and have been working at the GFDL lab in Princeton, studying impacts of climate change and weather there in Princeton.
So born and raised in New Jersey, I graduated from right here at Rutgers in 2013 with a meteorology degree, and I am the meteorologist for the Press of Atlantic City here in New Jersey. I've been here for a little over 5 years. I also do some side work for News 12 New Jersey as well. And before that, I worked in weather consulting at Weather Watchers, which is in Hackettstown, New Jersey. So I've kind of been all over the state, but definitely happy to be a Rutgers graduate and talk with you today.
I don't recall when I first picked up on Sandy, but it was probably a week or so before, when some of the early forecast models were showing something developing down in the Caribbean. And I'm trying to think. I think that there's this nice website too, Tropical Tidbits, which I think had only come online that summer, if I recall correctly. So I was probably looking there, and I recall, some of the forecast models. Was it the ECMWF model, kind of like a few days out or 5 days out, was calling for Sandy to make this famous left-hand turn that brought it into New Jersey, and I think that's probably when I really started paying attention, when I realized that we could be potentially in for a significant event.
When Hurricane Sandy made landfall and when we first found out that Sandy formed, I was actually a student at Rutgers. So I was in my sophomore year in the fall semester. So I was there at Rutgers, heard about it, on the news and also through my meteorology classes and the meteorology students there as well. So being a meteorology student, I did a combination of both. I heard about it and tracked it via the news, but also tried to track it myself, looking at the National Hurricane Center website, the National Weather Service website, and then I think that was my first experience with modeling. So taking a look at models that were available online and seeing kind of how the models had the storm progressing and seeing which models were taking the storm out to sea versus making that infamous westward turn into New Jersey. So a little bit of both.
As for the effects of Sandy, wind and rain were the main factors for the damage that was caused. As you got farther south into New Jersey, the rainfall totals got larger and larger, getting between 8 and 12 inches of rain down in Seaside and Wildwood. This amount of rainfall caused serious flooding that occurred down the shore throughout Jersey that would amount to sufficient damage.
The day of October 29th, which is actually my dad's birthday, being there with my parents, watching television, and the TV would start flickering on and off. And you're like, it's coming at some point. And you just have to have your phones charged and, kind of ready to go. And eventually at some point, power went out and you're kind of like, what am I going to do? So you start staring outside and, across the street from us is a golf course. And you saw these green flashes in the air. And I'm wondering, I'm like, well, what's green? I said, well, lightning's not green. I said, rain's not green either. It was transformers blowing, and power going out elsewhere across the town.
One of the main things that happened in my area was power outages. We didn't have as much severe flooding as other places in New Jersey had. However, we did lose power for about 2 weeks. And I was also out of school for 2 weeks due to the power outage. And the power outage, it took so long for them to restore the power was because of all the tree debris and like structural damage. And it took them a long time to even clear the streets out to be able to fix the power lines. So it was a long time. Another thing that occurred in my area was a lot of uprooted trees, especially around my house. We lost about 42 trees around my house because I live on like a half an acre of land. That was quite a cleanup, as we'll talk about, but it was quite the experience. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
The other prominent factor was the wind gust, where the peak wind did not go below 44 miles per hour. The average wind gust appeared to be around 60 to 70 miles per hour across New Jersey, especially in northern and central Jersey. The highest wind gust peaked at Seaside Heights, New Jersey, with a speed of 91 miles per hour, where most of the damage occurred.
For New Brunswick, we had high wind warnings, coastal flood warnings, and then regular flood warnings as well. What made this kind of an interesting situation is that Sandy definitely started out in the tropics and became a hurricane and strengthened into a Category 2 hurricane at one point. But by the time it made it to New Jersey and made landfall in New Jersey, it was no longer considered a tropical storm or a hurricane. So we actually didn't have any tropical storm warnings or any hurricane warnings, even though it did have hurricane force winds, just because it wasn't technically still a hurricane. So actually after Sandy, the National Weather Service changed that, where that you could keep those existing hurricane warnings available even if the storm progresses into a post-tropical hurricane. So we just had the high wind warnings, the coastal flood, and flood warnings.
I would say, since I was 11 at the time, Hurricane Sandy was a little scary to me, especially when the wind started picking up as the storm headed closer to my area. I remember I could just hear the whistling of the wind, especially in the overnight hours when it strengthened more and the eye wall was kind of hitting more my area. One of the main things I remember too is overnight we constantly checked outside through the windows to make sure none of the trees that we heard falling were hitting our house or our fenced in area. And at one point we checked our fenced in area because we had a trampoline at the time, and a pool, and we were checking, and I noticed when we were shining the flashlight through the window that I didn't see the trampoline. And I was like, oh man, like, where did it go? And we continued to look through the window, and lo and behold, the trampoline got picked up, I guess, by very strong winds, went over my pool onto my fence, and that was a pretty intense moment because, you know, that trampoline could have landed anywhere. It could have landed on my house, could have landed in the pool, somebody else's house. So it was a very scary moment. Thankfully it didn't cause too much damage, just the fence, which is fine. But it was pretty scary, especially in the overnight hours. Just we could just hear the trees falling all around the house, and we were constantly checking. And yeah, overall pretty crazy experience, but it did help intrigue my interest in meteorology more, and I'm hoping to learn more about hurricanes and how to become better prepared in the future.
It's definitely a memorable storm. I'll always remember the sound of the winds. I've lived in the same house since almost when I came to New Jersey, so 15 years basically. And that's the only time in the 15 years that the wind sounded the way it did. We didn't actually, unfortunately, I didn't have a weather station actually at the house at that time, so we don't have a measurement, but now I do have a weather station. So I don't know how strong the winds actually were, but just from the sound, I don't think we've had, even occasionally we get a severe thunderstorm with some strong gusty winds, but nothing sounded like Sandy did, even like Isaias and these other storms we've had since that have been kind of gusty. Nothing has reached Sandy level intensities at my house anyway. So that's what I'll always remember is the sound of the winds. And the other thing, with a hurricane, it's not, with a severe thunderstorm, you get the winds for 10 minutes and then it's done. But with Sandy, it was hour after hour. There was a good 3 or 4 hours of some pretty strong winds. So it just did not let up for a while.
After Sandy, coastal towns realized they needed better protection from future storms, since whole houses and structures were destroyed. Many houses were raised onto stilts afterwards, as well as some important electrical facilities, in order to keep them out of the water for future storms.
My name is Mark Miller. I'm a professor of atmospheric science, and I teach a number of courses in the department here at Rutgers. I have been involved in the field of meteorology, gosh, for 35 years plus at this point. So I've been in the field for a long time, seen a lot of changes in the way in which we do things. So that's a little about me.
My name is Michael Opegard. I served as the director for Monmouth County Office of Emergency Management from 2011 up until 2022. Prior to that, I was a deputy coordinator there from 2008 and have had basically an emergency management background for the last 32 years or so. Started out at the municipal level, and as I mentioned to you before, I retired from the county in March of this year and moved out into the private sector.
Other protective measures have also been implemented on the coasts, such as raising dunes and adding jetties. These help keep flooding and storm surge from affecting houses and towns as much as they did during Sandy in the future.
So the main preparation for me at our house, we knew the big threat was an extended power outage, just from how strong the winds were going to be. So we made sure we had some fresh batteries and we knew where our flashlights were, that sort of thing. I think probably a few days before, I made sure our gas tanks were full. That was an issue after the storm because there were so many power outages that all the gas stations were offline. Can't fill up, you can't operate the pump without electricity. And so those few gas stations that did have electricity had really long lines of cars trying to gas up for a little bit after the storm. So I do remember taking that precaution, filling up ahead of time in case there were extended outages. I'm pretty sure, we checked our, food and water stocks just to make sure we had, didn't have to run out in the heat of the storm to get any staples or anything like that. And then it was just a waiting game to see what would happen.
The thing that folks need to really understand is that, from the emergency management and public safety perspective, we are not, we don't want people to, leave their homes or evacuate, right? We issue those evacuation orders after a lot of careful consideration, because once we issue those evacuation orders, the public becomes reliant upon the services that we provide, right? If they can't, shelter with friends or family or put themselves up in a hotel. So it's really, really important that people are prepared. They have an evacuation plan. They know where they're going to go when they're told to evacuate in that preparation process. And they should also ensure that while they are evacuating, that they have, a number of days. 3 days supplies of, food and water and the necessities that you need to care for yourself and your family in the event. And just really heed those warnings. We don't take those lightly when they're issued, but we do it for one reason and one reason only, and it's for a life safety, right? We're trying to protect the lives of the residents.
Oh gosh, so I was a college student, and even though I was tracking this storm from basically the time it formed, I was completely unprepared for this. And I think that, goes for most of the college students there. In hindsight, I would have done a lot of things differently, but I learned from this storm, to have or be prepared for extensive power outages, which I just was completely unprepared for. So I remember going through my dorm or my apartment and trying to pack things in the dark, and it was just very chaotic. So I would definitely get a weather radio. After we lost power, I was pretty much completely in the dark with what was going on. We really had no way of getting any kind of weather information or any other information for that matter after the power went out. So having some sort of radio or weather radio would have been extremely helpful in that situation. I also would have stocked up on non-perishable foods and bottled water as well, and kind of just had this emergency to-go bag, which I did not have. So definitely learned a lot about preparedness from that experience.
The destruction from Sandy was devastating, costing 233 lives, as well as $68.7 billion in damages, making it the sixth costliest hurricane in history of the United States. Coastal cities like Atlantic City and Seaside Heights were hit the hardest. At Seaside Heights, pictured here, a roller coaster was taken down by the storm, as well as in Atlantic City, a large chunk of the boardwalk was washed away into the ocean. New Jersey was not the only state affected, as many other states had heavy impacts as well. In New York, there were widespread power outages as well as extreme flooding in subway systems. In all of the areas impacted by Sandy, there was a multitude of people left without shelter for prolonged periods of time. Many houses either needed serious repairs or were completely wiped away, and building back these homes took a considerable amount of time.
The flooding aspect, catastrophic flooding here in Monmouth from that event, in various pockets of the county, Manasquan, Brielle area, Belmar, Spring Lake, Avon, jumps up into, the Bayshore area and, Union Beach, where literally, like 15.4 feet, I think was the number, if I remember correctly, of storm surge that Union Beach experienced up there, and it just devastated the coastline from the wave action and the storm surge.
I would now like to bring your attention to the track of Sandy's impact stretching from the Caribbean Sea to the northeastern U.S. coastline. Sandy ravaged the country of Cuba as a major hurricane before tracking northward. As Sandy moved along the U.S. coast, it made an unusual left turn due to a trough out west. This trough, powered by a dip in the jet stream, quote-unquote, scooped Sandy from the east and affected millions west of the track. As Sandy raced up north, its warm core dissipated, turning the storm into a powerful, extratropical, low-pressure system, putting populated cities off the coast in danger.
So I live in East Brunswick, where we were fortunately, not in any immediate danger of flooding. We had a power outage for I think we were out of power for 6 days. So, it was certainly an inconvenience, but compared to other folks in other parts of the state, can't really complain that much. So yeah, that was sort of and then we had this sort of cold event happen after Sandy. So, I think that was probably the most difficult aspect of it, just because the house was starting to get cold.
On the backside of Sandy, a powerful dip in the jet stream and a cold front brought up Arctic air. Along with this Arctic air appeared a trough that helped Sandy race up north. Then, along with ample moisture from the south, snowstorms developed, dropping snow in higher elevations in states like West Virginia. Sandy became a full-blown superstorm with a mix of rain, winds, storm surge, and on the backside, heavy snow.
I lived in an area at that time. I still live in a treed area, but we had a lot of trees in the area where I live in, and I guess one of my most graphic memories. We were out of power for almost over 7 days. It was 8 days exactly, I believe. I think it wasn't quite the entire eight. It was somewhere on that 8th day we got power back. But the one of my lasting memories of that storm was, of course, sort of hunkering down. But as the storm was really kind of winding down just a little, I did peer out the back door. I went up we had a home that had sort of a lower level, and so I went out just to open the back door, kind of to get a sense for what had gone on, and the smell of pine from broken pine trees was literally like an air freshener had been cast over the entire area, and I could see trees down, and it was very obvious to me that there were a lot of trees down in the area where I live. So I didn't expect that we would get power back anytime soon. We did have some flooding in that storm, but for in the area where I lived in at that time, flooding was less of an issue than wind damage and trees down and power outages. And of course, being out of power as most of us in New Jersey have learned over the years, when you're out of power for an extended period of time, it's quite the inconvenience, and especially during Sandy, because in the occasion of Sandy, it's hard to it's not it's easy to forget that just a few days later we nearly had a snowstorm. I mean, it was quite chilly after the storm, and so house temperatures started to creep downward. And a few days that Sandy made landfall on a Sunday, and I believe by Wednesday, and memory may not serve, but I believe it does. We did have a little bit of snow on the ground on Wednesday morning. It might have just been a coating if my memory serves, or it might not have been snow at all. I think it was snow actually, but it didn't take long. By the following Saturday, the temperatures in the houses in the area where I live were literally the outside temperatures. So if it was averaging, 50 degrees outside, then inside your house, it was roughly 50 degrees by that time, and creeping downward quickly.
The large flooding that occurred during Hurricane Sandy produced the costliest natural disaster in the history of New Jersey. The flooding damage alone came in at $29.4 billion. The most significant flooding in New Jersey occurred in the Raritan Bay.
Just one comment on the storm itself. So Sandy was, and the snow, and I just thought of this, and I thought I might mention this. So Sandy was relatively a hybrid storm. Sandy was a little part hurricane and a little part winter storm, all sort of combined in one. So I think because of the seasonality, the preparedness maybe changes a little bit because of that. And I think, when you're in late October, I mean, you have to think now about being prepared for colder weather that could follow a storm, and that you might not have a power for that. In terms of preparedness, I think mostly it's just paying attention to the watches and warnings, and understanding that despite all of our technology, and we're quite good at forecasting the weather, especially in what we call the shorter range, the 0 to 3 days out. We're really quite good at that now. I think despite the fact that we're as good as we are, there's still some uncertainty, and I think it's made clear as best we can in some of the media summaries of what might happen, and in watches and warnings. But I think for preparedness, understanding that while we have a lot of technology and we're really good at this, Mother Nature can still throw you a curveball. It doesn't do it very often these days in terms of modeling, but there is uncertainty, especially in hurricanes. And I think you need to consider that when you think about preparedness. You need to consider the entire cone that the National Hurricane Center puts out, rather than just the center of that track. And I think that's a common mistake that the public makes. I think sometimes when we look at those cones, we think, oh well, it's not going to it's not going to make landfall here because it's a wide swath there. Well, that means it could make landfall anywhere in that swath, not just along that. So I think in terms of preparedness, understanding that there is always going to be a little inherent uncertainty, and not allowing that to lend confidence. In other words, not allowing the fact that the center of the cone isn't right in your area. Don't allow that to lend confidence that would compel you to make a decision to remain, for example, in an area that might suffer storm surge, on the hope that that's going to be the landfall position, because as we recently learned, that's just not always the case.
Along Sandy Hook at the northern end of Monmouth County, a tide gauge recorded a record high water level of 13.31 feet. A storm surge of 8.57 feet was also indicated, which set a new record, beating the previous record of 2.87 feet set back in 1960 by Hurricane Donna. The highest water mark in the state was 8.9 feet, which was recorded by the Coast Guard station in Sandy Hook. Hurricane Sandy was the most devastating storm in recent years, and it is important to remember its impact for future preparation. Thank you for watching.